Hello, my friend. On today's episode, Mark and I are talking about leadership. Specifically, we're talking about our current approach to leadership, which we call relational leadership. And we're not just talking about leadership. We're going to share some stories about times when we really failed as a leader. Specifically, we failed as a relational leader. So if you want to hear some times when Mark and I really flopped as a leader, keep on listening, my friend. It's a great episode for you. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to give a quick shout out to our Business for Unicorns Instagram account. We're crushing it over there on Instagram, my friends. We put in some great content on a regular basis. There's snippets from this podcast, snippets from our YouTube channel, great tips and advice that come from the emails we're putting out on a regular basis. I'm just giving us a giant pat on the back, mostly you and Rosemary Fisher, giant pat on the back. So if you, dear listeners, are not following us over there, go over to our Instagram right now. It's businessforunicorns.com. You won't regret it. We'll click the link down in the show notes below. It'll take you right over there, and give us a follow because you will get regular tips that you can use on a daily basis to be a better gym owner. So go follow us. What's up, Fisher? How are you, my friend?
I am doing pretty good.
Yeah. And I do mean it. Kudos to you and Rosemary, who keep our content machine running with really great stuff on a regular basis. It's good stuff.
She gets the credit. I gotta give her all the
Good.
She just takes my shenanigans and puts them on there.
I love it. Well, shout out to you, Rosemary. I know you listen to these. Let's talk about today's topic. And today's topic is really us maybe sharing some examples of how we've come to our current thinking about leadership and what makes good leadership. And, this is a topic we're both real nerds about. And one of the approaches that both the research shows is very compelling and that we've learned in our own experience is really compelling is this idea of relational leadership. And relational leadership is really just the idea that leadership is not just about one charismatic individual. And it's also just not about really well looked after followers, right? Leadership is actually a relationship, right? It's a dynamic give and take between one or more people, two or more people, and to think about your skills as a leader being about your skills in building strong, growth fostering relationships is really something that we've come to learn both through our experience and through research and reading is really like the best approach one can have to leadership. And so we want to talk a little bit about what that has meant to us and maybe share a few stories about how hard it's been to become the kind of relational leaders that we want to be. And so maybe let's just start by maybe defining this idea a little bit more. So how do you currently think about kind of the term relational leadership, Fisher?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I'll pull this out of my butt. I'm sure you've got a better, more evidence-based definition from your time in the academy. But I don't know. I guess when I think about it, I don't know. It just strikes me that so much of that relationship is about the person, about being, I'm going to riff on here and I don't know if this is even going to be anything we like, but there's something about that definition particularly which really appeals to my values of egalitarianism. And I think my natural revulsion to the status games of more traditional hierarchical relationship that for me is something about being a real human with a person that you're working with. It's not working for you, that you're working with. And you do have different roles. Accountability plays a thing. You do have a certain, I think, obligation to hold somebody accountable and also be primarily responsible for that person's development. But ideally, to my mind, I think it was a little bit more, first of all, of a two-way street, number one, than the way it's often thought of. Because I think one thing that doesn't work in a lot of relationships that I think it can also go up as well as down is starting to, frankly, other the person.
Yes.
Right. When I think about doesn't work in relationships, it's the cliche leader that, and there's some research that suggests leaders actually stop seeing micro expressions as well because the person has a different. You're not the monkey that has any power over my banana consumption, so you're less of interest to me. I can't even read you the same way I could because I know I have some level of status power over you. Conversely, I've also, candidly, I've probably been on the opposite end of it where I felt somebody stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as boss. And certainly, when I look back at some of the specific experiences, I think, I probably did play a role and probably could have done some things maybe a little bit better. But I think there's a dynamic in play partly because of the power differential that can really subvert those relationships in ways that are not helpful, that don't lead to good business outcomes, and are not happy feeling to either party. And relational leadership, I think the way I understand it, uh, is I can kind of come back to this idea of like committing to being human and
Hmm.
understanding that the care, the health of that relationship is of primary value, right? Which is not mutually
Yep.
exclusive getting the work done. But if there's not a real like care and desire for the other person to flourish and grow and thrive in the service of whatever business task you're working on,
Yep.
you're not going to get where you want to go. You won't get good business outcomes, and you won't be happy.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. I think I couldn't agree more. I think that's all spot on. Yeah, and I'll share my definition, and I'll share a little bit of what we have. Actually, we have a whole playbook for Unicorn Society members about
Mm.
relational leadership, and kind of we go over kind of 5 pillars of that are basically habits and skill sets you will learn as a relational leader. But my overall summary is actually something you already said, which is relational leadership really gets rid of the idea of a power over or under
Mm.
relationship at all, and really focus on a power with, right? Where as a leader, you are sharing power, you're sharing authority. It's thought of as a two-way street, as a collaborative approach. And the 5 pillars are these in a quick nutshell. One
Mm.
is leaders who demonstrate empathy. They build and demonstrate empathetic relationships where you care about each other as people and think about each other's thoughts and feelings, right? The second thing is that it fosters open communication, right? This is a relationship where it's a two-way street, both in how we share power, but also how we communicate, how we talk,
Yeah.
both given equal time to share, right? That's an important pillar and skill. Leading by example, leading by your values, right, is another kind of relational leadership thing, is that people want to follow and build relationships with people who they feel like have congruency with what they say and what they do. And so leading by example and being the kind of person you want others to be in your
Yes.
organization or in your life
Yes.
is kind of critical to have that integrity.
Mm.
Relational leadership's pillar number 4 is invest in relationships. They invest in relationship
Mm.
building activities. This might look like just having lunches together, having consistent one-on-ones, retreats.
Mm-hmm.
It can look like lots of things, but we invest in our relationship, not just your productivity, right? And then
Yes.
the last one here, I think, is the one that I think should be in every a pillar for every kind of leadership, but is that a relational leader really does a great job of celebrating and recognizing success,
Mm.
right? They really lift people up,
Yes.
and it's almost a kind of a positive psychology view, right? Where
Yes.
you're gonna get farther by recognizing the strengths in people and
Yes.
leveraging those than the opposite. And so that's not exhaustive list, but those are 5 pillars I think really distinguish what makes a relational leader, and all of that I think makes a lot of sense to anyone who's tried to manage or lead anyone. And even right now, both of us in each other's answers, we've given a lot of head nodding to each other, like, yes, everything you said makes total sense. The things that, and that all that is hard to fucking do.
Yeah.
That's all very
Totally hard.
hard to do. and so and so we say all of that with utter confidence that that's the way it should be. And I think one of the things we want to do in this podcast is share some examples of how hard that's been for us and how and times when we've struggled to do that. So I don't know, Fisher, what's a story you have to share?
Oh gosh, where to begin? I mean, I often think about, the first year of MFF. So we, uh, where did we go that we locked Brian Patrick Murphy and Justin Stratton in a room to get
Oh,
feedback from the team about us, and they took
we
notes and then
did.
passed it on to us.
That's right.
I can't remember where we were, but this was like early. It was like maybe year 2, but you and I I think had gone somewhere together. I think maybe we went to a Europe or something. But anyway, we came back,
Yeah.
and I remember being like very hurt because one of the pieces
Mm,
of feedback they gave me was like, is essentially the gist of it. And this, honestly, even now, years later, sounds like ludicrous to me. But one of the pieces of feedback was that some of the team were intimidated by me, which I
mm,
was like, what? Like I'm the least intimidating person in the world,
yeah.
not realizing that that's maybe not entirely wrong, but also there is just this power dynamic that isn't
Yes.
even necessarily my fault, but just is present, that I now understand to know, like, oh, I wasn't doing enough job of mitigating that. And
Hmm.
specifically what I wasn't doing enough of was really trying to check in with the people. And I remember Brian and Kyle at one point took me out for lunch. I can't remember if it was before or after, and essentially gave me a version of the same thing. More specifically, they were like, look, you just kind of have to ask people about their day, right?
Yeah.
And you and I have known each other for a long time, so you've even seen some of my own journey about this and know that, like, I kind of grew up in a background where I wasn't really asked ever any questions in my entire life by my family.
Yeah.
um not mean spirited, but a kind of like deep in curiousness, which for me, I think combined with my interest in big picture things and ideas and solving problems, which I find so thrilling and exciting,
Yep.
I had to understand that a lot of people, their love language is asking them about like, how is
Yes.
your day going? How is your such and such? And it's something I've thought a lot about too, because honestly, it doesn't make me, I still don't feel good about it. I still feel like there's like something weird and wrong that I'm not like more interested in the minutia, maybe of someone's home life.
Yeah.
But what is true, what I know is true, is I care very deeply about the people, right?
Sure.
And I'm entirely capable of saying, I care so much about you
Yeah.
that I want to invest in this relationship and dig in. And I want to, as an expression of my care for you, kind of develop the ability to get curious in a
Hmm.
sincere way
Yeah.
and ask about like how your shopping for your wedding dress went and really understand like what is it you look for in a wedding dress,
Yeah.
because I care about this person, and even if that's
Yeah.
not intrinsically interesting to me, I care about this person enough that I can find a way to like hook into it. And
Yep.
again, to be clear, different people are different, right? So another mistake I made was after I went I took like the disc profile and I was like, all right, I'm gonna really invest in relationships. Well, then I just try to do like blanket fire, and I was like making everyone on the team go out for coffee. And there were people on the team,
Yeah.
hilariously Carly being a great example, where I
Yeah.
was like, "So you dating anybody?" It was like borderline like inappropriate. They're like, "I don't particularly want to talk about this stuff with you,"
Yeah.
and Carly,
Totally.
if she's listening, would have a great laugh at this too, because probably she's somebody that part of I think
100%.
why we got along so well, probably both would have benefited from digging in a little bit more with each other. Um, so certainly I think you want to be sensitive to how that person, what they receive as a positive
Yes.
checking in. I think that the simplest potential takeaway, which again is probably obvious for a lot of you listening, but I had to learn the hard way, which you model great, Keeler, is like when you start the one-on-one,
Yeah.
you don't just go right into solving the things, right? You have to
Yes.
like, and ideally it's more than just a, how's your day going? Okay, cool, great. But maybe
Yeah.
once in a while you're like
Sure.
dot, dot, dot. But I don't know. I mean, for me, a system, and I think I've just like modeled this off of you. Like if I'm having one-on-one with somebody, we're
Yeah.
going to at least start with just go one beyond how was your day and more like, how was your weekend? Or
Totally.
how was such and such, just to give like a chance, like, let's just be human together. Let's
Yeah.
check in first. And
Yep.
frankly, even if you're a Machiavellian, you do get a sense, I think, to check in, where's this person at right now? What
Yes.
sort of subtle pickups with their energy? Is there something going on that, maybe I want to, is maybe there's an unsaid thing maybe we're going to want to say here that I can just pick up
Yeah.
by this. I don't want to make it snooping around because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I'm trying to like
No,
sift
but I
for
think it's
data.
it's understanding how are you? What's going on with you
Yeah.
that I need to
Yeah.
know that helps us do the work together, right? So again, even
Yes.
if you're just Machiavellian about it, you're just like, how do I optimize this person as a worker or
Yes. Yes.
performer?
Yeah.
It's still useful to know, well, what's going on? How was your
Yeah.
weekend? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you were sick last week. How are you feeling today?
Yeah.
Right? Or you were moving. Are you all settled yet? Right? I
Yeah.
mean, like
Yeah.
any of that helps me understand how do I support you in producing the results that you're hired to do
Yeah.
here, right? And
Yeah.
at the very least, maybe we can connect on a personal level and we develop
Yeah.
more trust with one
Yep.
another, which is always going to be helpful, right? So
Yes.
either no matter how deep you want to go, right, even just a little bit of this kind of connection on a human level is
Yeah.
so valuable. Yeah, it's so valuable. I think it's a good moment to pull up here and also say that what this isn't, what this isn't is asking you to be best friends with everyone you work with,
Right.
right? In fact, please don't. We've done that too,
Yes.
and that has
Also
had
challenging.
both
Also challenging.
good and bad parts. But relational leadership is not about being everyone's bestie. In fact, it's really in fact that's detrimental, right? Is to really to have your relationships where you have such loose boundaries that it's hard to have any expectations of anyone, right? So we don't mean that, all right? And certainly it doesn't mean that you have to talk about your personal life with people who don't want to talk about their
Mhm.
personal life, right?
Yep.
That's not it either. But it does mean you do need to understand how this person works, what matters
Yep.
to them, right? And I think a little bit of conversation and one-on-one meetings and team meetings goes a long way. Yeah. And you know this story, Fisher, but I didn't come to this easy either. I mean, it's stuff that, happens very naturally to me now as like a habit, but you've heard this story. I think I might've told this story on this podcast before, but when I was working for the Four Seasons hotels and I went to work in Hawaii, And I came as like this East Coast guy they brought on to like lead this whole team. And I thought I was crushing it. It was like spent the first few months having one-on-ones, trying to develop this team. I ran the concierge front of house team, and I thought I was doing great work. But a few months in, I really wasn't changing anyone's performance. Like nothing was really clicking. It felt like people were like nice enough to my face, but no real change was happening. The team was not improving how they worked with our very high expectation clients. And so I talked to one of the people who had lived on the island I lived in Hawaii for many years, as like who was my kind of mentor, and asked her like, "Hey, what am I doing wrong? Like, I feel like I'm doing all the right things. I came in here ready to kick ass, having one-on-ones, team meetings. I got SOPs. Like, I'm fucking doing it." And she was like, "All right, well, talk me through your meeting. What do you do in your one-on-ones?" And I walked her through my agenda, and my agenda was basically like, get the fuck after it, right? It was like,
Yeah.
what are your
Yeah.
tasks you're doing? What's working? What's
Yes.
not working? Like, what did you get done? And she just looked at me at the end of going through this agenda and was like, "Oh, okay. Well, when do you talk to them about their life?" And I was like, "What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" Right? Like I'm just like, "What do you mean talk about their life?" She was like, "Well, like these are people who are like family. We all live in this little tiny island together. They all know each other very well. Everyone's neighbors. Everyone's like related in some ways. They got friends and family who are all related." She was like, "If you want to get their time and attention and you want them to trust you and want them to follow you, you have to care about all of them, not just the one that shows up here for 8 hours a day." And she said it, maybe even nicer than that. She was, so kind about it, but she was like, "You're really missing the boat here, Michael." And she was like, "You need to talk to them and you need to know their kids' names. You need to know their grandkids' names. You need to know how long they've lived here. You need to know, all that stuff." And I was like, totally blown away by that at the time. Like, living, growing up on the East Coast, mostly having jobs here in this fast paced East Coast cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one was ever like slow down and talk to people
Right.
about their weekends,
Right. 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 Right.
and then I got this little island where culturally that was absolutely not just the expectation,
Yeah.
but I would never have gotten anywhere if I didn't build relationships based on trust, empathy, celebrating their success, investing in our relationship together by meeting outside. And so I had to go to, baby showers. I had to go to birthday parties. I had to go to barbecues on the beach. I say had to. I also wanted to, but I mean,
Sure.
I needed to like really show with my actions and my words that I cared about the whole person in front of me, before I was able to win any of their loyalty, trust, respect, and we could truly make it a two-way street. And so, I was grateful to have the mentorship to learn that pretty quickly at that place. But I mean, it took me a few months of really banging my head against the wall before I realized how much I was screwing up.
Yeah. It's interesting. That story also, your experience there also looms large for me. I remember that being like a very important story for me to understand early in my career. Like, oh, and admittedly, I'm sure that was harder than what we've had to deal with running, a business that's mostly based in New York City. I imagine there's
Yes.
a different set of cultural standards for the importance
Yes.
of
Right.
family and
And
life
that's
outside the job.
100%. I think it's a whole other podcast about kind of cultural difference and how to manage
Yeah.
across different cultural challenge differences. And that was certainly it. I mean, these are all folks who are mainly some Hawaiian, some Filipino, some folks who have been on that island for many, many generations, some folks who are young in their 20s with many, many kids, some, people who, so there's like a lot of things that were just very different about people's lives and worldview than anyone else I ever worked with before. And so this was just one layer of it. There's many more, but I think it just goes to show that no matter what your context is, whatever culture you're operating in or cultures you're operating within, the idea of relational leadership is that you are doing all the things we mentioned to build a growth fostering relationship with other people, meaning by
Yeah.
virtue of your time together and your connection, you are helping each other grow and improve yourselves. Right. And that's at the heart of the kind of relationship we all want with folks.
Yes.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts here to kind of wrap this up or make it more actionable? I think we already mentioned here that, some basic things people can do are, recognize and celebrate people's successes. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure your both
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one and team meetings are grounded in an agenda that puts kind of the humanness first, I think is really critical. Make sure that you're operating from like a power with perspective and sharing that power and authority as much as you can. Anything else that we want to leave folks with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's two things. One, just I think a quick observation that I think about that I think is useful, and then the second, I could spring on you, maybe get your hot take on something I saw recently on social media. I was like, huh.
Oh,
Well, the first thing I'll share is and this is of Stephen Coveyism, which is that you can be efficient with things, but you have to be effective with people.
Yeah.
And to be effective, unfortunately, doesn't fit you necessarily always into the box of 15-minute or 30-minute meetings. And I think there's a certain approach to this, which, by the way, I have a I like, and I wish my life worked like that. And I try to shoehorn as best I can, but sometimes like the meeting is just going to run late.
Yeah.
Right. As much as you want to be the efficiency person, it's like, no, for 20-minute meetings only, and get in, get out. I need your agenda, blah, blah, blah. Like you can be effective or efficient with things, but you have to be effective with people. And there's actually a very famous, funny story in Seven Habits where Stephen Covey's son is like breaking up with his girlfriend and he's scheduled like 15 minutes precisely. And he's like
Yes.
so apoplectic that she's still talking. It's 15 minutes later. It's like, I scheduled 15 minutes to tell her we weren't going to be her boyfriend anymore.
Yep.
But the thing that maybe, I know we're running short on time, but I've been meaning to ask you about this, and for the benefit of our viewers, I saw an interesting kind of saucy hot take from
Ooh.
Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb,
Uh-huh.
who I saw a little clip, and to be fair, this was a clip. I'm sure there's more context, and I'm sure I'm not going to exactly appropriately represent his view, but he basically says he does not have one-on-ones with anyone.
Oh, I've seen this. Yep.
Did you see this? And I think to explain his argument to our listeners, then you can give your perspective. The gist of it is I took it to understand is that when you have one-on-ones, he's like, usually then it just becomes a therapy session where the person I'm with is just there to dump their emotions on me. And if they want to dump emotions, and his defense, I was like, okay, well, maybe this would make sense in the context of a larger company. Charitably, I think part of what I interpreted to say is like, look, you can bring your feelings and yourself and your work if there's issues, but usually that's just not you and me doing it alone. It's in the context of our department or a couple other people that also need to be involved in that anyway. So he was like, and he was like, I was like, I don't know about this. And he was, and again, Brian Chesky, you've done better than me. And he was like, oh yeah, but I do talk to people one-on-one because I'll always call them. I'll be like, is it done yet? I'll call them. I'll call them big. Done yet? So I talk to them one-on-one to figure out, are you done with the thing yet? And I was like, oh, I don't know about this, And admittedly, I have maybe perhaps overcorrected sometimes for relational leadership stuff. Sometimes I do critique myself. I'm like, all right, I do spend a lot of time in these meetings. I think it works really for me. I think maybe it's not, I could pare it back a little bit. So I don't know. I'm just curious if you have any insight on that.
I'll say that I saw kind of I think a clip of it as well, but I didn't see his whole talk. I don't know the whole context, so I don't want to comment on what I think his opinion is. But generally speaking,
too bad I posted on social media. Michael Keeler thinks Brian Chesky's full of
totally
shit.
Like anyone gives a shit anyway. But still, I mean, I think the thing I will say is that the purpose one-on-one meetings serve is that everyone who goes to work and is paid to do a job needs an advocate. They need a support system. Right. They need someone to help them optimize themselves. They need someone to help them self-reflect, someone to improve, someone to give them feedback. Right. I mean, and so part of managing is mentoring. Part of managing is teaching. Part of managing is leading. Right. I mean, these are all things that are different functions, but all are required. And certainly managing people's feelings is just another kind of data you get as a manager and a leader. Right. And if you have someone on your team who is giving too much of that data, right, where their feelings are overflowing and overspilling in a way that's counterproductive or oversharing, right, there's a good conversation to be had about boundaries there, of course.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, if the hot take truly starts and ends with, I don't do one-on-ones because of all the fucking feelings, then that opinion can go right in the trash can. I don't imagine that's the whole thing. Right. But that opinion can go.
Yeah, it was more nuanced than that. But it wasn't that far off, which is why I was like, I wonder what Keeler thinks about this.
So if that's it, that in and of itself goes in the trash can. But I'll also say that, I think people do need to have feelings at work and have those feelings be acknowledged and supported, or else they just get worse, right? And if we assume that people can turn off their emotions at work, then we're just lying to ourselves.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think a thing I hear a lot that I think I did a whole video on this once. I understand like the concept. I understand how this could be true. Like leave the emotions out of it. It's just business, right? Leave your emotions out of it. And listen, like I think a lot of our role, frankly, as coaches with gym owners oftentimes is not having them leave their emotions out of it, but realize the emotions are not the most important thing. The data often is. And sometimes their emotions are not leading them to do the conclusion, to
Yeah.
take the action that's in line with their values or what they really want to have happen, right? If
Yeah.
someone's being reactive, that's not helpful. If they're not analyzing the situation correctly because they don't understand benchmarks, that's not helpful. But,
Yes.
and again, I understand what it means, but I think we're not saying leave your emotions out of it. We're saying
No.
learn to manage your emotions in a way that's like thoughtful, that allows you to
Yeah.
feel them in your body and move through them, to
Yeah.
understand that sometimes there's useful data. Sometimes the data is telling you things that are maybe not as helpful,
Yeah.
and be a critical thinker with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think moving through the emotions,
Yeah.
and
I
I guess
think
for
that
me, like I'm a big feelings guy, so obviously I don't have a
yeah,
choice. Like
I
I
think
don't.
that the shorthand. I think the shorthand should be the shorthand I like is bring your emotions and let's treat
Yeah,
them like data. Like bring your
yeah,
emotions. Let's consider
yeah,
it with all the other
yeah.
information we have. Because the reality, this. I mean, the reality is we as humans we can't turn them off. Number one, and number
Right.
two, we make every decision emotionally first and
Yes.
justify it
Yes.
rationally afterwards. Right? We
Yes.
know that's how the brain
Yes.
actually works.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, if we just pretend like we can put that all on the back burner, and suddenly emotions are not going to be a factor
Yeah.
in it, we're just not being honest about how we function as brains and bodies. And so I
Yeah.
think let's find a way to embrace emotions with clear boundaries so they're actually useful. We learn how to
Right.
cope and leverage them to
Yes.
make the best decisions and
Yes.
create an environment where we can all thrive. That's what we're trying to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's this is maybe too reductive and flippant, but, I've often thought of emotions as a very incredibly useful, but slightly imperfect set of biochemical algorithms that are
Mhm.
helping keep you safe and move you towards, status and sex and treasure, for being completely like
Yes.
accurate.
Yeah.
But they're not perfect. It's not like there's bugs in the system. You also
Yeah.
have some wiring that can get whacked out of balance by certain life experiences, where you can
Yeah.
have these sort of like, trauma's maybe an overplayed word, but I think
Yeah.
like trigger actually is a very useful word.
Well,
You have these unconscious
yeah. I think that the
patterns
short
and actions that are not actually going to help you.
yeah, the shorthand I hear in organizational psychology sometimes is feelings aren't facts, but they are reality.
I
Right.
love that. Yeah, I love
Right.
that. I love
That,
that. Applaud you,
which is
organizational psych people.
yeah, right. It's like this is the person's reality, whether you think their
Yeah.
feelings are valid or justified
Yep.
or appropriate, or it doesn't matter. That is the reality of the person we're dealing with. So they're not facts. That doesn't dictate all the decisions we make,
Yes.
but they
Yes.
are the reality we have to grapple with. And so,
Yes.
but yeah, I think it's a good topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's something that I'll go back and try and watch the rest of the
Clearly,
video and find out what else he
feelings
says.
about it. We have
All right.
feelings about leadership.
Yeah, so many feelings. All right. Well, great conversation, Fisher. Thank you as always. And dear listeners, if you're not following us on Instagram, I'm berating you again. Go follow us on Instagram. Links in the
We
bio. Thanks for a great talk. See you on the next one, Fisher.
Bye.